As well, here we've got the U.S. Commerce Department rolling out sweeping regulations on Friday that restrict the sale of semiconductors and chip-making equipment to Chinese customers as the U.S. looks to build out its own chip industry. Yahoo Finance's Akiko Fujita here with the latest, joining us this morning. All right, so Akiko, what do we know so far about what's been imposed by the administration and what's been put on the table?
Yeah, let's talk about the very latest, though, because we do have a response from China. As you can imagine, very swift and very forceful. The foreign ministry spokesperson saying this is yet another attempt by the U.S. to reinforce technological hegemony. These are their words. The Commerce Ministry saying this move threatens the stability of global supply chains. And then you've got the Global Times, which is the tabloid, which is often seen as the mouthpiece for the Communist Party, saying that they warned of a savage attack on free trade, saying this would have dire consequences. Now, to your point, we've seen a huge sell-off on Chinese tech stocks abroad here. We're talking about Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp. This is the largest manufacturer over in China. They fell the most since August 15th this year. You had declines in Huahong, Shanghai Fudan, Nara. I mean, you go down the list here. And all of this is because what we heard from the Commerce Department. Four key points. Limiting chip makers from semiconductors made with U.S. technology that specifically deal with AI and supercomputers. It's not a complete ban, but companies would have to apply for exemptions, and those are rarely handed out. Bans U.S. citizens or entities from working with Chinese chip makers. And some would argue that is probably even more significant because you've got U.S. citizens, maybe those who came from the U.S. working in China, who will not be able to do this. So that's a big concern for Chinese companies. And then you got limits of exports on U.S. chip manufacturing tools and technology, something we talk about a lot. These companies may be manufacturing the chips, but they're using U.S. equipment. And the biggest concern here is, number one, what does this mean for Chinese chip makers? A lot of people pointing to Huawei as an example. Remember what happened back in 2019 when they were put on the export ban list? I mean, this company is not the same that it was since then. They don't have the 5G technology in place. They've lost their market share in terms of their phones, their networking equipment. And the question moving forward is really going to be, well, how is China going to respond? Some would argue they have a very limited set of tools here because at the end of the day, while they may be manufacturing, the technology, the know-how, all of that is not just with the U.S., but U.S. allies, including South Korea, Japan, and European countries.
Right, that the U.S. companies design the chips and then they are made in China. But at the same time, aren't there then implications for U.S. companies as well? For example, as you mentioned, if a U.S. company makes the chip manufacturing or designs the chip manufacturing equipment, can they not then now sell that to China? Do they lose a customer? How does...
Well, they can't sell that to China. And I would point to ASML over in Europe as one example. We saw that stock down as well. And that's because that's going to be the big concern here. They may not be selling directly to China, but they can't use the U.S. equipment. So then it becomes, well, the U.S. can't force European companies, Japanese companies, South Korean companies to do exactly what they want. But if you put that limit in place saying you can't use U.S. equipment, that brings in a whole host of companies that are not American into these new restrictions.
It's messy. It sounds very messy. And as you said, China can't come back necessarily and retaliate because then they would lose that source of revenue. For example, if they were to say, well, the U.S. designers can't this Chinese factories. I mean, is that even an option for them to say that?
Well, and then think about just, we're talking about tech equipment, whatnot, but I mean, this as we've learned, right, trickles down into so many different sectors. Car makers now looking at this to see what it means. I mean, so many different sectors could certainly get involved in all of it.
Are some of the restrictions, are they too early, or is it just so precautionary or preemptive, even ahead of a lot of the capacity being brought online here in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, this is part of a larger push by the administration to really excel U.S. technology, not just bring manufacturing back, but cripple the Chinese side. And some would argue, even if China gets hurt in the short term, what does it mean in the long term? Are we seeing a bigger divide here between the U.S. and China in terms of technology? Because at the end of the day, if this is enforced significantly, enforcement's still a big question, that means that China is going to have to develop their own technology. What does that mean 10 years, 15 years down the line?
Right. Could it end up backfiring, I guess, is part of that question. Thanks so much, Akiko. Really interesting stuff, an important story that we're going to continue to track.